everybody, welcome to my channel From Small Things. My name is Sue and I'm a scrap quilter living in Southeast Pennsylvania. I'll catch you up on what I've been doing over the past week. I don't have as much to share this week as I normally do, but we'll jump right in and I'll tell you what's been taking most of my time this week. First of all, the thing that I think I've spent the most time on is the hand quilting. I've been working on my checkerboard quilt, the one that has the scalloped edges on it, and I've really been trying to hit that hard because I'm looking at the way things are developing in my sewing room and upcoming projects, and I have a lot of quilts coming up, and I hand quilt everything, and so I thought I really need to devote more time in the next coming weeks, especially on the hand quilting part of it. And because if I work in my sewing room a lot, which is always fun to do, but it's easy to come up with a quilt top in a relatively short time. But it takes more hours to do the hand quilting than it does to make the top. And I'll share with you everything that I have coming up, but that's just in a way of explanation is why I spent so much time this week hand quilting. And I'm only about a week into the quilt that I'm working on, so I'm sure I still have at least another week to go on it. Happy with the progress on it, but so next week too might be a little bit of a slow week again, because I'm really going to try and focus on the hand quilting so that my projects don't really fall behind and accumulate. Okay, so having said that, I did get a top finished, and it was one that we shared in last week's video, and it wasn't finished then, but it is now, and it's this one here. It's blues and browns. I started off this by making, these are actually 9 patches, these browns. They have 4 browns in a corner, and then surrounded by 3 whites here and 2 over here, so that it makes a 9 patch. It just isn't the traditional way to set a 9 patch as far as your darks and lights go. But those are all 9 patches, and I was trying to clear out some of the scraps out of my 2.5-inch drawer that I have, and so that's how this one actually started. And then I decided to put some small 9 patches in here, surrounded by sashing and cornerstones, because all of these 9 patches too, all of these blues, I had already made those, oh, I don't know how long. It's well over a year, maybe 2 years, because sometimes I just sew things together in the hopes that someday they'll find a home in the future. And they always do. I always do kind of find a place to put them. So I had these already sitting and waiting, and so I just mocked this up and laid it out, and I was happy with the way that it looked, so I was able to make the whole quilt then, this just out of my scrap drawers, and then these 9 patches I already had. So the only thing I really had to construct was the sashing around the 9 patches in order to make it the same size. And so this one came together pretty quickly, and I was considering making it maybe a little bit bigger, and then I ran out of steam. I kind of reached a point where I was happy with it. It's big enough for me. It's a good usable size. And so I decided to just stop where I was. And the border on this is a crumb border. It's made out of all leftover small pieces that I generally sew together into long strips, and then I can use it as a border, I can use it as sashing, I can use it on the back of a quilt. Sometimes if I need to make the back a little bit larger, I can use them there. But I'll show you some of this a little bit closer and show you how I added some details to it. For those of you who've been watching for a while, you may remember the episode I did where I cleaned out my closet. And in my closet, I had a lot of boxes filled with things that I like to use when I make crazy quilts. There were a lot of embellishments in there in the way of like laces, especially in there, and crocheted edges on ladies' hankies and things like that. When I cleaned that out, the smaller pieces that I came across, I put in this mug and I left it by my sewing machine because these were so small, and I thought, well, if they're out in the open and they're nearby, maybe I can find a use for some of these in my sewing projects as I go along. So this is one of them where I did use them. You can see some of these, they're just small pieces, and you know, they're really pretty, but there's not a lot that I can do with, you know, the smaller pieces. So because it was next to my sewing machine and it's right out in the open, I wasn't planning on using it for this quilt, but it was right there, and so I saw them and I dug some out and I put some on, and I'll show you where I put them. I put them on the crumb border here. I put a brown/gold border on, and when at some point when I was making these, I don't remember exactly, I don't actually remember doing this, but I also used my other sewing machine that has decorative stitches on, and I did put a few little decorative stitches here and there just to try things out, I guess. Or here's another little decorative stitch here. There's a really small one. Some of them are hard to see because my machine, the throat plate, it doesn't go very wide. So when I put this on and I saw those decorative stitches already on here, you know, they're spotty, they're just scattered throughout. I thought, well, this might be a good place then to also put some trims and lace. Here I have a brown satiny kind of little piece of ribbon here. Over here I put a few small ones, this pretty one here, and I just sew these on by machine. And then here's another piece. Again, I just want to keep the edges down. I just want them really secured. And then here's a smaller one. And I didn't want the ribbon to be like the star of the show. I didn't want it to look like it was overdone in any way. So I just put things very scattered just here and there. Here's another decorative little stitch and another little piece of ribbon. So it's just a little something just to add interest, because I know when I look at quilts too, you know, when I go to shows or if I see antique or vintage quilts, if there's like a little tiny extra, you know, on the quilt, if there's just a little something special on the quilt, it grabs my attention right away. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, like a lace trim or something like that. Sometimes it can be an unusual fabric that looks like it maybe doesn't belong, but it looks, you know, fun, or, you know, it catches your eye. And maybe it's just a little bit, it just makes you think about what was the maker thinking? Did they do that intentionally, or did they run out of something? So it's the little surprises, I think, that for me anyway, when I look at old quilts, well, they don't even have to be old quilts, but those are the things that usually catch my eye. And so that's what I was thinking when I put the lace on, is that, yeah, I just didn't need that to be the star of the show, but for anybody who wants to spend a little bit of time looking closer, then they'll see those things, and hopefully they'll get that, great feeling that I have when I work on them. So this top will be basted very soon, and so this will be, let's see, I was going to say number 3 in line for being quilted, but I'm not sure about that. The one I'm working on now is the checkerboard, and then I have the green checkerboard one that I was going to give to charity, but now I'm keeping. That one's already basted and ready to go. And then I have the vintage one that I just purchased at Ephrata. That one's basted and ready to quilt. And then there's this one. And this is the backing that I chose for this. This is a nice warm brown for the back of it. So I have the backing, I have the top, and I'm not sure if I will get that basted within the next week, because I have another one. So as you can see, I have quite a bit going on as far as quilts that are ready to be quilted. But while I had this quilt out, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the crumb piecing that I do. I keep this basket right here on my cutting table, and I throw in lots of tiny little pieces in here, skinny little pieces that I'm just not sure what to do with, where else, how to use them up, things like that. So there's just little things in here, and I try to organize them in color families in here, and I sew them in color families also. When I first started doing this many years ago, I was just sewing true scraps together without regard for color or pattern, at all. The strips I make are approximately 3.5 inches, and then they will finish at 3 inches. I do have a few that are a little bit wider that I was making for something specific, but generally speaking, I keep it at about 3.5 inches in order to finish at 3 inches. And so that's what this basket is. And I did just clean out and organize this, not 100%. I started with the color families that had the most in, and that really needed to be addressed. And so I got a few of those all sewn up, and I'm caught up with those. And then some of the others, there's not very many. There's not very many whites at all. There's not very many oranges. Purples I could probably do. There are blacks over here. So the others aren't that bad. But I did also spend quite a bit of time this week trying to keep things in check, so again, they don't overflow. And I'll show you, these are strips that I have already sewn together in color families, and I'll keep these in my closet. I actually did try to use some of these before, I think especially the blues, on a few quilts that I've made earlier this year, but I did not have enough to go around the outside of a quilt. So I just had to put them on a hanger and just wait until I accumulate more. But there really isn't that much on here. There's only a few yellows, a few blues, few greens, and it looks like mostly reds. And the browns that I put on this quilt, it worked out almost exactly perfect. I was probably 2 inches short. And so all I did was I went into my drawer of 2.5 inch squares and I sewed a few of those together. and it made it then all the way around the outside of this quilt. So I couldn't ask for anything better to use up everything that I had accumulated in that color family. So these are my crumbs. So I do try to remember to use them and remember to keep working on them so that they also don't get out of control. I have already too. I know I've made a quilt or two that I've done just a rainbow progression as a border on the outside of it. And that way, you know, I don't have to wait until I have enough blues or enough greens. I can just connect these together. And I know I've also put these sometimes on the back of a quilt to make my quilt back a little bit wider. So those are the uses that I have for my crumb piecing. As far as working in my sewing room too, other than constantly trying to stay organized, I've just started working on a pinwheel quilt that I want to make. And I've shared this before. There was a pattern that I've used twice before in this magazine, Quilt Works, and it is from June and July of 2004. So it's an older book, and this is the pattern in here. And so like I said, I've made this twice before, but I don't own any of those quilts anymore. They both got sold. And so I want one for myself because I really liked working on it, and I really liked how it looks when it's done. And so for my quilt, I'm trying to stick to just really bright, cheerful colors. And I'm using these papers to make half square triangles. They're called star singles, and they come in a variety of sizes. The size I'm using, the squares will finish at 2 inches when they're done. And I also have another pack here. These will finish at 1 inch. But you can also use other products to make half square triangles. I know there are triangles on a roll also that you can use, and there's also a product called Thangles. The process is very similar for all of these paper pieced triangles. I use Thangles also because I can make 2-inch finished triangles out of a 2.5 inch, like a jelly roll strip also. So I have those and these. This one I start with an oversized square so that I trim it down. I cut mine at about 6.5 inches, and this makes 8 triangles at a time. And so this stack here, these are all sewn to the papers so far. And I'll try and find one that shows up well on camera. It might be hard to see because the thread I use is a gray thread. So I don't know if you can see on the back, the sewing lines on the back. It's one continuous line, and you just keep turning the paper as you go until you get to the end. So I just started sewing a lot. I will look at the pattern and see how many I need total. I believe it's over 300, something like 350. For some reason, 356 is in my head, but I'm nowhere close to that. So right now I'm just sewing and sewing and sewing. So this stack I have sewn to the paper. I didn't do anything else. I didn't trim anything at all yet. And then this stack, I have not sewn at all yet. So I just, you can see they're not sewn at all. So I just put a pin in the center to hold everything steady. And then when I sew it, I just remove the pin. So this will keep me busy for another week because I don't usually sit down and sew this many all at once. My eyes kind of get a little crazy because you're trying to keep your sewing machine needle right on that line that you're supposed to follow. And after a while, I just need a break from doing that. I guess my eyes are old. But so that's my pinwheels that I'm working on. And I'm really excited about these. I'm actually looking at some of my other fabrics that, again, I want to clear out. I shouldn't say clear out. I'll never clear out, let's be honest. Never clear out some stuff. But there are times when I go in my stash and I think, oh, I should have used this for this project, or why didn't I think of that? So for this, I actually just got out some of my little novelty prints this morning because they're in their own separate basket. And I often forget about it because they're just in a basket in my closet. And so this morning I remembered and I got them out. There were a lot of them that I couldn't use because I tried to keep in mind these are going to finish at 2 inches. And some of the fabrics I have, the scale of the design on there would be too big, or they're too spaced out. And so you wouldn't really get to see that image on a 2-inch finished square. So I was trying to choose, you can see this, it's a little bit smaller scale of some of the novelty prints. So that is also officially now a work in progress. So the pinwheel quilt is, I know it's going to take me a while to do that. There are a lot of pinwheels, and so I'm going to give myself a little bit of time to work on that. I'm not going to start that from beginning to end continuously all in a row. I get kind of burned out when I do things like that. So I usually like to have something else also to work on in between. It kind of keeps me interested in things if I can switch from, you know, one project to another. So I've had on my list to work with some vintage fabrics for quite a while, and I'm ready to start doing that now. And this is the box of vintage fabrics that I have. I haven't picked out a pattern yet to work with these, but in my mind, I want something that the blocks or each piece, each unit is going to finish large enough so that it actually showcases the prints on here very nicely. I don't necessarily want to cut a lot of these up into really small pieces. So I want to keep them a little bit on the large side. And that's all I know for now. I haven't made a final decision. I have maybe a rough idea, but I want to get some books out and look. I'll know it when I see it. I'll know it when I see it. So look at some of these prints in here, and this box, it is literally breaking. You can see it. I need to use some of this up so that I can fit everything back in this box again. So I'll share some of my vintage fabric with you. I just love these prints so much. These are some of the blues I have. Here's a beautiful old floral. And now these two, there are a lot in here that you would not necessarily call quilting fabric these days. This one is one especially, I love it, it's gorgeous, but it's lightweight, very lightweight. I have used little bits of this before, and when it's in a quilt and quilted, it's fine. This one kind of reminds me of a pillowcase. I don't know why. Blue roses. But yeah, I just love these fabrics so much. and I know I'm going to really love working with these. Oh, this one too. I really love this. I have this same print too in pink, but I don't think it's in this box. I think that's on my shelf for some. I just worked with this actually not too long ago, but that's really pretty. And here's another vintage stripe. So I have a lot of choices. This is one, these are smaller pieces now because I did just use this. If you look at one of my past videos about making finishing a Dresden plate quilt for one of my friends, I used this vintage fabric on that quilt. And there was quite a bit of this, and so I don't have very much of this left at all, which is nice. That's good. There's an old plaid. So you get the idea. These are just, you know, when I come across them, some of these, a lot of these actually were gifted to me. This feels like a feed sack. You know, feed sacks definitely have a different feel. They're a little bit more coarse. I don't know if it is or not, but it has that feeling to it. Anyway, I was going to tell you, a friend of mine who I worked with years ago, her mother was an avid quilter. She was very productive. And when her mother passed away, my friend got in touch with me and asked me if I wanted any fabric, you know, from her mother's stash. I think her mother might have been a little bit of a hoarder. she had a lot. And so I said, you know, of course, absolutely. Oh, sure, I would love to have it. And so I think that's where a lot of this came from. And I do use it. I have used some already, but I just want to make an entire quilt now, just using some of these vintage pieces. So I think I have a good selection here to work from. There's some pinks. And then a lot of reds, a few greens, not very many greens, some other reds and some pinks in there. So I'm really excited about making something with these. I just have to decide what to do. The only thing that I'm sure about is I don't want to use white as a background because these are all vintage and they've aged. I think I'm going to go with an off-white, something that's just not as stark and bright, you know, as a true white. So that's as far as I've got on this. But maybe next week I'll be able to share some progress on this, especially if I keep this on my table and don't put it away. And I am excited to be able to share the quilt on the door behind me. That one is 100% finished now. That is an Ohio Star quilt that I based on a quilt that I had made previously. I had done mine all in browns, and there's no pattern for it. I just used one block, the Ohio Star, and I made that in 3 different sizes. I made a 12-inch, a 9-inch, and a 6-inch block, and then I fit them all together because the math works out well for those sizes. And I made then 18-inch blocks, and then I just sewed 18-inch blocks in rows. I only made actually 16 blocks that are in this quilt. But when it's all together, because of how the blocks are turned and every block is different in there, it's really hard to see where one block, you know, starts and ends, you know, and then the next one begins. And the quilting that I did on that is just straight line quilting. That's what I did on the brown quilt also. And this one was done for a new friend of mine who sent me all of the shirts, and I think it turned out just beautifully. I love the color palette so much. And then the back of it too, I'll share the back of it with you too. The larger pieces that I had left over, I cut 10-inch squares, and so the back of it also is the same shirts as are on the front, and it's just big 10-inch squares on the back. So we'll take this down and we'll have a look at it, and I'll also share the original quilt that was the inspiration for this. So here are both quilts side by side. They have the same number of blocks as far as my 18-inch blocks go. The biggest difference is on the brown one, I still had a lot of leftover browns from cutting for the blocks that I wanted to be able to use. So on mine, I put a double sawtooth border around it to help use up some more of those fabrics. On the blue one, my friend did not want her quilt as big as mine was, so I didn't do that on here. On this one, I just used up, as I was cutting these again, if I could get a small piece that was about 2.5 inches wide, I would just put those on a pile. And so the outside border on here is all of those 2.5-inch strips sewn together to go around the whole outside of the quilt. They finish at 2 inches. Now both of these quilts, the quilting is very simple. It's just all straight line quilting, and that's it. It's simple to do, but there's still a good amount of quilting on. My lines are relatively close together. They're not all exactly spaced the same because I let the block dictate how many lines of quilting went in each block. So my 6-inch blocks actually have 9 straight lines going through. My 9-inch blocks have 12 lines going through each block. And my 12-inch blocks actually have 18 lines going through each block. So they're not all spaced exactly evenly, but overall it's generally the same amount of quilting in each block. And it's certainly less than an inch apart. I would say it's between 3/4 of an inch apart, and in some places just 1/2 of an inch apart. So there's a good deal of quilting on both of these quilts. And I'll show you, I'll peel a little bit of this back so you can get an idea of the backing on here. And this one, I just put a simple black border around, which I think looks really sharp on here. I have another quilt to baste also. I don't have to. This is not my quilt, but I want to do it because it's been in a bag in my house for a very long time. And so I want to get this done. This is Pam's quilt. I did not make this. This is all English paper pieced. So this is all done by hand, except for the very outside border that was sewn on with a machine. But everything in the body of the quilt was done by hand. And she hand dyed all of these fabrics in here. Some of the things she used were madder, cochineal, if that's how you pronounce it, avocado, and acorns to get some of these colors. And so I'm going to finish this. I chose a back that we're both fine with. She has the batting for me, and I think I'm going to do just simple straight line quilting through this. This has a very modern and a very vintage look at the same time. So I'm excited to get started on this one too, but basting is first. So I've been doing a lot of basting of quilts recently, and this is another one. So now you can see why I am, they're starting to pile up. I have 2 downstairs that are already basted and ready to quilt, and then I have this one, and then I have the one that I just showed you that is the blues and the browns. So that's 4 quilts that are waiting in line now, basically, to be quilted, and then plus the one I'm currently hand quilting. So one after the other. So hopefully by next week I'll have this one basted. Whew, well, I did get something done this week. I'm super excited about the finish that I have with the Ohio Star. I feel like I'm making really good progress on my hand quilting, and I'm going to spend more time with hand quilting again so these projects don't stack up and I don't feel overwhelmed. I do like to keep things moving at a certain pace. I don't ever have a schedule, but I've been doing this for so long that I have an internal sort of clock, or I have a feeling of how long things should take, and it keeps me on track, and it allows me to finish things and keep things moving through my sewing room. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining me here again. I really appreciate it. And until next time, I hope everybody out there has fun in your sewing room too. Bye.